When Allied troops first encountered German weapons during World War II, they quickly realized that many of the guns carried by their enemies were not only effective tools of war, but also symbols of precision engineering, reliability, and deadly efficiency. And it did not take long before soldiers began to admire certain German firearms, to the point where capturing one became either a practical advantage on the battlefield or a prized trophy that represented the fiercest kind of combat they had survived. Because these weapons carried a reputation that spread across units, traveling with stories whispered in foxholes, shared around campfires, and carried home after the war as evidence that a soldier had faced the most powerful army of Europe and come out alive. Long before Allied soldiers reached German soil, rumors spread through the ranks about the legendary pistols, submachine guns, and machine guns that the Wehrmacht carried, and these stories shaped expectations so strongly that many Allied troops entered battle imagining that capturing a German weapon would be just as memorable as winning the fight itself, because German engineering during this period had a distinct international reputation that was widely known even outside the military world. It symbolized craftsmanship, attention to detail, and mechanical precision. So when Allied soldiers found German firearms in trenches, bunkers, and abandoned positions, they examined them with fascination, realizing immediately that these weapons were very different from anything they had grown up seeing in American or British civilian life. The most coveted trophy of them all was the Luger P08 pistol, a weapon whose instantly recognizable silhouette became a symbol of the German military, and Allied soldiers treated it not just as a piece of equipment, but as a token that represented survival, bravery, and close quarters fighting. Because a man could not obtain a Luger unless he had either disarmed or outlived a German soldier who had carried it. And this reality gave the pistol an almost mythical aura. Soldiers told one another that bringing home a Luger meant you had seen real combat, the kind of battle where life and death collided in ruined buildings, narrow trenches, or smoky forests. And this belief turned the search for Lugers into a kind of informal competition that stretched from Normandy to the Italian front. Part of the Luger's appeal came from its unusual design. It did not look like any Allied pistol. Its toggle lock system and thin barrel gave it a distinctive, futuristic appearance. And when a soldier pulled the trigger and watched the upper receiver snap back into motion, unlike any other handgun, he immediately understood why the Luger was admired throughout the world. The pistol had been in German service for decades, appearing in both world wars, and it symbolized an older, elite vision of German military tradition. So much so that even though it was somewhat sensitive to dirt and mud, its iconic status never diminished. Allied soldiers did not care that it jammed more easily than their own sidearms. They cared about what it represented, the thrill of holding something that once belonged to the enemy, and the pride of carrying home a trophy that would spark conversation for the rest of their lives. Closely behind the Luger in popularity came the Walther P38, a pistol that lacked the antique elegance of the Luger, but compensated for it with modern reliability. While the Luger was a symbol, the P38 was a tool, a practical and sturdy weapon that operated dependably under field conditions because it had a more straightforward mechanical design and could survive mud, dust, and freezing temperatures better than the older pistol. Allied troops respected the P38 for its functionality, and although it never replaced the Luger as a prestige trophy, many soldiers actually preferred the P38 for combat use because it fired more reliably, was easier to dismantle for cleaning, and felt more balanced in the hand. Some soldiers carried it as a secondary weapon during patrols or urban fighting, especially when their own equipment became damaged or lost. And the fact that the pistol continued to be used by post-war German police forces for decades showed how effective it truly was. But no weapon commanded as much respect or fear as the German MG42, a machine gun whose unique mechanical sound became so notorious that Allied soldiers could identify it instantly across thousands of yards. They called it the buzzsaw because of the terrifying high-pitched ripping noise it produced when firing, a sound unlike any other weapon in the war, and one that struck panic in anyone who heard it. The MG-42 fired at a rate exceeding 1,200 rounds per minute, far faster than the Browning or Vickers machine guns used by the Allies. And this staggering rate of fire created a wall of lead so dense that it could stop entire infantry advances in seconds. To face an MG-42 was to understand its deadliness firsthand. It cut through foliage, tore apart brick walls, and pinned down soldiers so effectively that entire strategies had to be adjusted simply to neutralize positions where the gun was mounted. Yet despite its fearsome power, Allied troops also admired it deeply because they saw how smoothly it operated and how quickly German crews could change barrels, clear jams, and reposition the weapon under fire. It was, from a technical standpoint, one of the finest automatic weapons ever made. And soldiers knew instantly that if their own machine guns malfunctioned or if ammunition ran dry, capturing an MG-42 could mean the difference between survival and death. In many cases, Allied troops actively tried to seize MG-42s after overrunning German defensive positions. These captured weapons were sometimes turned directly against German forces, particularly in hedgerow fighting in France or close-quarters engagements in Italy, where their exceptional rate of fire provided critical advantage in sudden ambushes. However, using them required skill, since the recoil and firing speed could quickly overwhelm inexperienced operators, and barrel overheating remained a constant challenge. Still, whenever an Allied soldier managed to deploy one successfully, the psychological effect on both sides was enormous. German troops recognized the unmistakable sound of their own buzzsaw firing back at them, and Allied troops felt the thrill of wielding one of the most feared weapons of the war. Alongside the MG-42, another German weapon that fascinated Allied soldiers was the MP-40 submachine gun, a lightweight automatic weapon often associated with German infantry leaders, paratroopers, and mechanized troops. Its folding metal stock made it compact and easy to carry, especially in cities, forests, or armored vehicles, and Allied troops respected how comfortably it fit into the hands and how naturally it fired during rapid engagements. The MP-40 was not extremely accurate at long range, but within the short distances of street fighting or house-to-house combat, it delivered reliable bursts of fire that allowed soldiers to clear rooms, repel ambushes, and defend narrow trenches. British and American soldiers valued the MP-40 not only for its practicality, but also because it symbolized an enemy elite. Whenever they saw German squads equipped with MP-40s instead of standard rifles, they knew they were fighting highly trained troops, and capturing one of these weapons felt like claiming a piece of the enemy's identity. Some Allied soldiers swapped their own submachine guns like the Thompson or Sten for captured MP-40s because the German weapon was lighter and easier to control in automatic fire, though ammunition supply remained a constant limiting factor. Beyond small arms, the German weapon that drew both respect and dread from Allied soldiers was the legendary 80mm flak gun, a masterpiece of multi-purpose engineering that served as anti-aircraft artillery, anti-tank weaponry, and general long-range support. The 88, as it was known among troops, became infamous because it could destroy Allied tanks at astonishing distances long before the tanks could return fire, and its high-velocity shells made it one of the deadliest weapons of the entire war. Soldiers approaching a battlefield where German 88s were hidden often felt a chill of fear because they knew that these guns could strike without warning, tearing through armor and creating explosions so powerful that entire tank crews were killed instantly. Despite fearing the 88, Allied soldiers admired it deeply. They respected its precision, its range, and its destructive effectiveness. And some crews even tried to turn captured 88s against German forces whenever ammunition was available. However, because these weapons required specialized shells that Allied supply lines did not provide, capturing one offered more psychological satisfaction than practical combat use. Still, soldiers understood that the 88 represented German engineering at its highest level, and its reputation endured so strongly that post-war armies around the world studied its design for decades. Meanwhile, ordinary German rifles and carbines, such as the Karabiner 98K, did not have the same level of mystique. They were strong, reliable, and used widely by German infantry, but they did not offer clear advantages over Allied rifles, like the M1 Garand. Their real value came from their role as personal trophies rather than battlefield upgrades. Many Allied soldiers brought home these rifles as reminders of the war, decorating them on walls or passing them down through generations as family heirlooms. The same went for bayonets, helmets, badges, and other personal gear collected from German soldiers, all items that carried stories and memories that remained vivid long after the war. Captured weapons also had symbolic meaning. They represented triumph over an enemy that had dominated Europe for years. They proved that a soldier had stood face to face with danger and survived. They were reminders of battles fought in hedgerows, forests, mountains, and cities. They became part of veterans' identities, physical proof that they had experienced something unimaginably intense. To truly understand why Allied soldiers sought out German weapons with such determination, we must look beyond simple battlefield practicality and examine the emotional, cultural, and psychological layers that shaped a soldier's desire to carry, capture, or keep enemy arms. Because the war was not only a clash of armies, but also a clash of identities, myths, reputations, and personal experiences that molded the way men saw both their enemies and themselves. As Allied troops advanced deeper into occupied Europe in 1944 and 1945, they encountered German defensive lines built around weapons that had been engineered not merely to repel attacks, but to intimidate opponents with their effectiveness. This created an environment where soldiers developed a complicated respect for their enemy's tools, a respect formed through direct encounters with weapons that had the power to stop entire units, shred vehicles, or turn the tide of a battle. When soldiers faced such weapons and survived, their survival itself became intertwined with the weapon's image, creating a psychological desire to claim it as proof that they had endured one of the most lethal military forces the world had ever seen. The MG-42, more than any other German small arm, shaped Allied perceptions of German firepower. Its rate of fire was so rapid that individual shots blended into a continuous tearing sound, a seamless stream of destruction that left soldiers scrambling for cover as bullets cut through tree trunks, wall fragments, and anything that lay between them and the gunner. Entire squads were pinned down because of a single MG-42 nest, and Allied soldiers later described the sound as one of the defining audio signatures of the war. This sound, heard during countless assaults, imprinted itself so deeply into soldiers' memories that many could instantly identify it decades later. What made the MG-42 even more impressive was the speed and efficiency with which German crews operated it. Machine gun teams trained relentlessly, learning how to swap overheated barrels within seconds, reposition the weapon under fire, and maintain its function in mud, snow, and rain. When Allied soldiers captured an MG-42 after storming a defensive position, they encountered a machine built for sustained warfare, crafted with a level of precision that reflected the German industrial approach to military engineering. Even though it was difficult for Allied units to use these guns consistently due to ammunition supply and mechanical familiarity, many soldiers felt that simply possessing an MG-42 marked them as someone who had survived a deadly encounter with exceptional enemy firepower. The MP-40 carried a different kind of appeal. It represented mobility, modernity, in the face of the German infantryman. Its folding stock, smooth automatic operation, and simple silhouette turned it into a desirable substitute for the heavier American Thompson or the sometimes unreliable British Sten. Soldiers who fought in tight streets or dense forests noticed how naturally the MP-40 handled, especially during rapid, unexpected engagements, where reaction time meant survival. Even though its 9mm ammunition was not always readily available, many Allied soldiers still chose to carry the MP-40 during patrols or special missions, because of its ease of use and its association with German elite units. This association gave the MP-40 an aura of prestige. When Allied troops disarmed German officers or captured paratroopers, they viewed the MP-40 not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of the enemy's discipline and professionalism. Soldiers who managed to seize one often held on to it proudly, storing it in their barracks, lending it to comrades, or packing it carefully for the journey home when the war ended. Because submachine guns were far more restricted in civilian life than pistols, the MP-40 often remained in military collections or museums rather than in family basements. But its image endured in stories, films, and the memories of veterans who had carried it briefly on the battlefield. The Luger, however, remained the ultimate personal trophy. While it offered no tactical advantage over Allied pistols indeed, it was mechanically sensitive and prone to jamming if exposed to mud. Its unique toggle action and elegant shape made it a weapon of legend. Soldiers spoke about it even before they encountered German forces, directly because the Luger had permeated popular culture decades earlier, appearing in newsreels, magazines, and even adventure stories. Bringing home a Luger was not only proof of combat, but proof of bravery, luck, and accomplishment. Veterans later recalled that some units had informal rules discouraging soldiers from taking reckless risks in the pursuit of Lugers because men occasionally endangered their lives while searching dead German officers or rushing toward abandoned trenches in hopes of retrieving a pistol before the enemy counterattacked. Entire firefights were shaped by the desire to collect trophies, and military chaplains sometimes addressed these behaviors, reminding soldiers that an object should never outweigh survival. Yet the desire persisted, driven by the image of the Luger as a symbol of the war itself. The Walther P-38, despite lacking the romance of the Luger, earned respect because of its reliability and ergonomic design. It continued to be used long after the war, and often became the practical sidearm that military collectors or veterans held on to, while the Luger remained the showpiece. This distinction reflected two sides of the Allied soldier-esque experience: the celebration of symbolic victories and the appreciation of superior engineering. Yet German weapons represented more than functionality or prestige. They represented the harsh reality that Allied soldiers were not just fighting an enemy, but confronting an industrial war machine designed to dominate Europe. The 80mm flak cannon stood as the clearest symbol of this combination of fear and admiration, because its power was visible not only on the battlefield, but in the wreckage it left behind. The first time an Allied tank crew encountered the destructive force of an 88, they understood instantly that their armor offered little protection against such a weapon. The shells pierced Sherman tanks so cleanly and efficiently that many crews described the experience as surreal. The gun's range and accuracy turned it into a battlefield predator that could strike from distances beyond the reach of Allied tank guns. Soldiers who managed to destroy or capture an 88 felt a sense of triumph far greater than seizing a pistol or submachine gun, because they had neutralized a weapon that had the power to dominate entire battlefields. The German engineering philosophy behind these weapons influenced how Allied soldiers perceived the war. They understood that their enemy was not simply relying on overwhelming numbers or aggressive tactics, but on finely crafted tools that reflected decades of industrial development and military doctrine. This forced Allied soldiers to adapt, learning to counter weapons that sometimes outperformed their own. The desire to capture German firearms grew partly out of this adaptation, because understanding enemy equipment helped Allied troops survive future encounters. Captured weapons played a role beyond individual soldiers, influencing intelligence operations, training programs, and weapon development. When Allied forces discovered German weapons factories, testing grounds, and research facilities, they realized that many of the weapons they admired in the field were only the beginning of a vast arsenal that included prototypes, experimental designs, and advanced technology that had not yet reached the front. Engineers studied German weapons carefully, dismantling them, documenting their design, and even incorporating some features into post-war developments. The MG-42, for example, heavily influenced the later US M60 machine gun, while elements of the 88S engineering shaped anti-aircraft and anti-tank doctrine in several countries. Within military units, captured German weapons also served emotional and social purposes. Soldiers displayed them in their barracks, photographed themselves holding them, and compared their finds with those of their comrades. These objects preserved the memory of intense combat, personal bravery, and the hardships of war. A soldier who had lost friends during an attack might keep a German pistol as a reminder of the battle, tying it emotionally to sacrifice and survival. Some veterans later passed these weapons down to children or grandchildren, wrapping them in stories of comradeship, fear, courage, and the strange sense of respect that develops between enemies who confront each other repeatedly in life-threatening situations. German weapons became artifacts of memory, bridging generations and offering tangible connections to experiences that were impossible to fully communicate in words alone. Yet for all this admiration and fascination, practical limitations ultimately shaped how these weapons were used. Ammunition shortages made it difficult for Allied troops to rely on captured guns during extended battles. The German military used different calibers and cartridge designs, forcing Allied soldiers to collect ammunition from enemy bodies or supply depots, a risky and often impractical task. Maintenance also posed challenges because the soldiers lacked proper tools, spare parts, or training for prolonged use. Thus, even though German weapons were valued for short-term tactical use or for psychological impact, Allied troops generally reverted to their own equipment for long campaigns. Despite these limitations, the emotional power of German weapons never faded. Their influence extended beyond the battlefield into the post-war world, shaping movies, books, museum displays, and popular imagination. The image of the MG-42 firing from a fortified position, the silhouette of the MP-40 in a paratrooper's hands, the distinct curves of the Luger pistol, all these became symbols of World War II itself. For Allied soldiers, German weapons represented more than tools. They represented experiences etched into memory, moments of victory earned through danger, and the strange mixture of fear and admiration that soldiers often feel toward a capable enemy. They reminded soldiers that they had faced one of the most formidable fighting forces in history and survived. They captured the blend of horror, respect, pride, and reflection that defined the wartime experience. In the end, the German weapons most desired by Allied soldiers, whether the iconic Luger, the reliable P-38, the terrifying MG-42, the agile MP-40, or the mighty 80mm gun, were not simply objects of war. They became symbols of human endurance, battlefield ingenuity, and the connection between personal artifacts and collective history. They shaped the memories of those who fought, influenced post-war military development, and continue to fascinate generations who study the conflict today, reminding us that every weapon carries not only engineering skill, but also the stories of the men who wielded it and the men who sought to capture it.